mode.
Hello everyone, I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of Treasury Webinars. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for our webinar today, Busting 5 Early Payments Program Myths to Create Opportunities. I would like to thank our webinar partner today, Tapalti, whose strong commitment to thought leadership helps make this webinar possible. Early payments programs have had a stigma attached to them that can make many finance teams roll their eyes. The grand promises made, making payables cross neutral while helping to eliminate supplier cash flow issues that are often difficult to achieve and not worth the effort. Today, we will dispel 5 myths about early payment programs that can help you position them as a dramatic differentiator for your organization. The myths we will dispel include early payments programs are difficult to manage, suppliers will not participate, the relevant of finance will be difficult, the discounts won't be worth it, and that your finance team is just too busy and not ready to leverage these programs. Before I delve into the content, I'm going to offer a few quick words about Treasury Webinars, cover a few housekeeping items, introduce my co-speaker for today's webinars, and then review our learning objectives for the webinar as they represent our value proposition to you for investing an hour of your valuable time with us today. At Treasury Webinars, we offer webinars designed to empower Treasury, AP, and AR success at companies of all sizes across all industries. We only do what we do best, webinars. Now for the exciting housekeeping items. For those of you interested in receiving CTP credits for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all the polling questions, remain online for the duration of the webinar, and complete our post-webinar survey. If you have any questions regarding CTP credit, please send me an email at ernie@treasurywebinars.com. Again, that's ernie@treasurywebinars.com. I'd love to hear from you today, so we can take your questions at any time in the questions/chat area in your GoToWebinar control panel. Fear not, if we do not get to your questions during the Q&A session, we will reach out to you directly to address your question. Finally, we appreciate your consideration in taking a short survey at the end of the webinar today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. Now let's take a quick look at our learning objectives today. We want you to be able to identify specific opportunities to improve working capital management at your company, separate the myths and realities of early payments program, and quantify the potential ROI to your company in leveraging early payments programs. Before I delve into the content, it is now my pleasure to welcome my co-speaker, Shauna Stibe, to the webinar. Shauna currently serves in the role of Director of Product Marketing at Tapalti. Shauna, it's a pleasure to have you today. Welcome to the webinar.
Great. Thanks so much, Ernie, and happy to be here.
All right, so now let's dive into our agenda a little bit. How are we going to accomplish our learning objectives? So first, we're going to talk about CFOs and the supply chain. Why not? Why is it the great time for companies of all sizes to look to engage their supply chain? And then we'll go into some overview and opportunities in terms of early payments programs. And then we'll get into the myths and realities of early payments programs. And then we'll offer some closing thoughts and some resources. So there are some fantastic resources that I'm going to share with you at the end of the webinar. If you're interested in receiving a copy of today's presentation with those links in there, please send me an email. Again, that's ernie@treasurywebinars.com. So let's start things off. So again, we're going to start with CFOs and supply chain. Why now? So it's great to see that CFOs and supply chain leaders are creating alignment between strategy, finance, tax, and operations, and unlocking hidden value within the organization and strengthening financial performance. A quote from E&Y, which we strongly agree with. So we're starting to see some traction here, but there's much more that can be done, and we'll talk about how large that untapped opportunity is in the marketplace, but also help you see that relative to your company. So wouldn't you like to partner with procurement and AP to help guide your CFO's strategy on managing supply chain risk? So whether you're in procurements, accounts payable, whether you're the CFO, treasurer, wouldn't it be great to deliver that value across the enterprise, improve working capital, my treasury folks, free cash flow, my accounting and AP folks, work on that cost of goods sold, and then everyone impact the overall financial performance, and then also unlock potential savings. So we can really impact both our top line, but also our cost line as well. So before we dig into the content, one of the keys to being able to leverage early payment programs effectively is to have your AP house in order. So just trying to get a sense of our audience and where you are in terms of processing, automating accounts payable at your company. So maybe you're just in the discovery phase, maybe you're evaluating solution providers, maybe you have a short list, maybe you're implementing or have a solution in place, or maybe you don't know at this time. I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. A reminder for those of you that are interested in the CTP credits for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all of our polling questions here today. Also want to take a few seconds to remind you that we can still take your questions in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. So leave the polling question up for a few more seconds. Then we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at the results. I'll make a little color commentary and offer my perspective based on the benchmarking information that I've seen and also specific benchmarking information that I have collected from Treasury Webinars events over the last couple of years. So let's go ahead. Your warning, I'm going to go ahead and close that polling question. Let's go ahead and take a quick peek here. So we have 45% of you that are implementing or have AP automation in place, which is great, a little bit higher than I expected. So those of you that are really have that solution in place and you're happy with that solution, your journey to leveraging these programs that we'll talk about effectively may be a little bit shorter, but fear not, the rest of you, AP automation, investing in AP automation is absolutely cost effective for companies of all sizes, and it can be a game changer. Those of you, 21%, you don't know, that's your takeaway. It would be great for you to find out. So especially if you're in Treasury and Finance, we need to look to partner more with our accounts payable colleagues and AR colleagues for that matter. So what technology is really allowing us to do is own that cash conversion cycle. So when you start to peel back the onion a little bit, the more you know about what's going on in terms of technology in all these areas, AP and AR, as well as Treasury technology, you'll be able to identify opportunities to really leverage value across the enterprise. So thank you very much, everyone, for answering our polling question. So let's just talk about why is this important now? Why does it deserve your CFO's attention or your attention if you're the CFO? What we're seeing, which is great, I love this as a Treasury person, real-time data for better cash management has become a top priority for CFOs, which I'm glad to see. And so and one of the reasons is that there's an increased focus on the effectiveness of cash deployment from investors. So what we really need to do is we really need to understand our cash deployment. What does that mean, folks? Owning your cash conversion cycle. And then what we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, in the technology space, we're seeing increased visibility in the AP and procurement processes. And what that's doing is it's really allowing companies to expose opportunities to lower onboarding and invoice processing costs. And we really do that. And in order to be successful in supply chain financing, we need to have this integrated approach. So one of the things that we'll talk about, which I really didn't have a lot of visibility into until I got into the weeds, is there are actually significant costs to supplier onboarding, and there are significant pain points that you can take out of the way if you leverage tools such as supplier portals. And the other part of that is our relationships with our suppliers are extremely important. So I'm always getting on my soapbox about supplier relationship management, and every interaction that we have with our supplier is important, and that all begins with the onboarding process. And then invoice processing costs. Those of you who attend my webinars know that we have entire webinars on invoice processing costs, and this is an area of low-hanging fruit. And then as we get things streamlined, the benefits are multiple dimensions to that benefit. One of those is lowering our invoice processing costs, improves our relationships with our suppliers. The better relationships we have with our suppliers, the more we're going to be able to extract value from these early payments programs. And then companies, again, I mentioned this earlier, companies, which is great, are realizing the strategic value of improving supplier relationships. Golf clap for that. And I mentioned more efficient accounts payable creates opportunities to improve working capital management. Just look at that visibility, my Treasury folks, your cash forecasting, you know what's coming and when it's coming, and you also are able to take more control, right, over how and when you make payments, which is something that I think companies are starting to realize that, but that's really, in my mind, if you want to say one sentence, what's the value of AP automation? Taking control of how and when you make payments, game changing for any company. And then the right technology is affordable to any business size and is cost effective. Let's go ahead and do another level set of my audience here today and just see how many of you are actually using these types of programs that we'll discover. So question, is your company currently leveraging early payments program? No. No, and you have no plans to do so. Maybe no, but you plan to do so later in 2019. Maybe you do it, on occasion, it's not really a focus. Or yes, use them extensively. Or E, you don't know. I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. Again, those of you who might be interested in receiving CTP credits, we are going to ask you to answer all of our polling questions here today. So in order to be mindful of our time, I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for another few seconds, and then we'll go ahead and take a quick peek at the results, and then I'll start to peel back the onion a little bit, and we'll start with looking at the great untapped opportunity that's out there in the marketplace, and then we'll dive into how to assess the size of that opportunity for your company. Let's go ahead and close the polling question, and let's go ahead and take a quick peek at those results. And the first thing that jumps out to me is 27%. I don't know or NA. So after the webinar, I'm going to convince you that it's going to be very much worth your time to see if you're doing it. If you are, great. Are you leveraging it as much as possible? If not, why not? Again, this can offer some low-hanging fruit. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, it depends somewhat on your AP efficiency. So you have to be able to process your invoices efficiently. So there has to be a gap between when those invoices are approved and when those terms are and those payments are actually due. So that time gap in there, and the more that time gap is, the more opportunities that you potentially have. Then we have 28%. Yes, so I'm glad to see 28%, but I think we'll see that there is very good reason to look at how that can be done more extensively. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to answer the polling question. Shauna, let me bring you in here. Do you have any thoughts about these results? What are you seeing in the market as far as trends with the adoption of early payments programs?
Yeah, I think it's common for companies to think that that for various reasons that they don't have any plans or want to implement an early payments program. There can be some, maybe you've tried at a previous company and it didn't go well, or you think there will be too much effort involved and your suppliers won't even accept it. So there's kind of a lot of different misconceptions that people have that Ernie will be talking about. But I think after the webinar, you'll be able to see the great value that can come out of it without having to put in as much effort as initially thought. So hopefully we can convert some of you to believers.
All right. Thank you very much. Just real quick, what would you say is, and there, Shauna, just one more question. I know there's 5 myths we're going to cover. What do you think is the biggest misconception? And that biggest misconception would be probably the biggest hurdle to folks really taking a look at this and giving it what it deserves.
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that it's going to take a lot of effort to implement, a lot of finance resources to get it off the ground and to spur adoption. And then as part of that, thinking, well, I don't want to undertake all of that effort since most of my suppliers won't accept it anyways, is kind of what we see as a big misconception there.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, again, for answering our polling question. So let's just take a look at what we will define as this huge supply chain finance opportunity. So it's a source from Capital IQ McKinsey analysis. So I'd like to focus down here. So up here, if you go through you look at an estimate. We have a $20 billion opportunity. But here's what we're seeing here is we're seeing a lot of growth, which is good. But even if we look at 2019, we're still at only $4 billion, and that opportunity is $20 billion. And again, it's not necessarily directly correlated to your company size. So there could be some low-hanging fruit here. Again, once you get your accounts payable house in order, what you'll be able to see is there's these strategic opportunities. And what will happen when your AP house is in order is your AP staff will mitigate the time spent on non-value activities, and you'll be able to focus their efforts on being more analytical. And part of that analytical role could be working with suppliers and identifying opportunities to unlock the value in these early payment programs and drive that adoption as well. So let's do a little bit of an overview of early payments program in case some of you aren't familiar. Maybe you've heard the term before, never really had the opportunity to dive in on a webinar. It's really early payments, I would say, is a catch-all phrase. All scenarios where a supplier is offered to be paid in advance of an invoice due in exchange for a discount, common discount, 210 net 30, 2% discount if you pay within 10 days. If not, the payment is going to be due 30 days. If it's not received by 30 days, it's going to be considered past due. And there are two predominant forms which we'll touch on today, which are dynamic discounting, which we will refer to as DD, and supply chain finance, which will have SCF, and both rely on dual arbitrage. I feel so smart because I said the word arbitrage. I always try and get that in on every webinar. What does that mean in layman's terms? A gap between the net payment terms and the invoice approval date. Again, we need to be able to process our invoices efficiently. So we need to be able to create. There has to be a gap. So 210 net 30. We have to be, if we want to take advantage of that, we have to be able to approve our invoices and make sure we can get the payment to our suppliers within 10 days. And if we can't do that, then that's not really an opportunity. So we want to see that gap. Another thing, just taking a step back, we need to have visibility, right, into these discount opportunities. It might be the case that there's a tremendous amount of discount opportunities that aren't being taken by your companies just because there's no visibility. One of the metrics that I like to see in terms of AP excellence is what are the amount of dollars that are eligible for discounts, and how much of that opportunity are we taking advantage of. And I see for more and more companies, I would say most companies, you always want to take the discount. It almost never makes sense not to take the discount. So there's that gap there. The second gap is between the cost of capital between the payer, which is your company, and the pay, which is the supplier as well. So there's that gap. So what is the opportunity? What is the value? Yeah, right. What is the value to my supplier in having that money in hand sooner versus the cost to me of getting that money out the door sooner and not having that money available maybe to invest in a short-term securities, which now short-term securities still, we haven't gone up that yield curve. That's another webinar. So let's take a quick look at some just fantastic diagrams from my friends at Topolti. These are slides that I would strongly encourage you to print out. I could probably spend 10 or 15 minutes on each of these slides. So I'll go through them a little bit briskly, but again, these are slides you might want to print those out and digest a little bit. If you want some more color around that, maybe you reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to do that. I'm sure Sean and her team would be happy to walk you through the mechanics as well. But basically, with dynamic discounts, a supplier, right, submits the invoice. It's inbound. It comes to our company for approval. We do our payment discount analysis. Okay, let's take a look at, they gave us the potential discount. Does it make sense? Can we process the invoice in time? So maybe there's some negotiation that goes on between, okay, this is when we're going to pay it. We'll give you this much off if we pay it there. It's not necessarily a standard term, so it's not just 210 net 30. It's let's just start to play a game of negotiation back and forth. I'll give you, I want 5% discount maybe if I pay in 10 days. So you might want to do that. So then we send the offer. Maybe we adjust the invoice. We need to revise the tax data on our side, process the payment. That offer is accepted. Boom. Let's say the terms are net 10. Then we make that supplier payment. So again, there's two gaps there. One is between the invoice date and then the date that we're able to make that payment. So when it's gone through our approval process, and then there's a gap between the opportunity cost of capital. So it is worth more to me to get that money out the door than hang on to it for those extra days. And for my supplier, it is worth more for them to have that money in hand, probably because they have a high, they might be a net borrower and they have a high interest rate in terms of borrowing those funds. And then in terms of supply chain financing, Really, the main difference here is that we are including a bank in here. So in a sense, there is some risk offloading going on here, rather than relying on the risk of our suppliers, and maybe our suppliers relying on that risk for us. So the first part of the process is the same, and then what happens is the payment is actually made to the bank, and then the bank's the one that actually facilitates the fund, and then there's a split in the value of the difference in the days between when the payments received between the bank and us as well. So basically, we are introducing a bank or another financial partner in here, and we are, in a sense, offloading the risk is being offloaded to a third party instead of being a direct exposures of risk between the two parties that we mentioned earlier. So this chart does a better job than I just did in trying to explain the difference. So you want to look at the pros and cons. So you want to look at these two different options. So in certain cases, it might make sense, depending on the risk profile of your suppliers. Maybe it makes sense for dynamic discount. Well, maybe not. Maybe there's, maybe we want to look at supply chain financing. So the pros for dynamic discount, most of control is from the buyer, and they can get good rates. The cons, it can be complex. It requires a buyer capital risk analysis. Again, we have to have streamlined accounts payable. It can be hard to scale without automation, but we'll talk about how we can get over that. And then there are some limits to who can participate. And then kind of the pros of supply chain finance. There's less buyer risk, and the discounts are fairly set. So it's 210 net 30. So in dynamic, you can have there's usually a wider range of negotiation between the rates, and you can get into tenths of a percentage and things like that. The cons, the supplier might not qualify. We have more paperwork. Part of it's because we are engaging a third party in the process, and it can be not scalable and limits who can participate. So just some differences there. That being said, what are the benefits to leveraging early payments programs? If they work right and effectively for your company, they can actually help attract and retain your suppliers. And you can leverage this during your contract negotiations. If you're not the procurement person, you need to really involve them in this early payment programs development and execution. It can reduce potential supply chain disruption. It can increase supplier loyalty. So I used to work in manufacturing, and to me, when I was in Treasury, our big suppliers were almost as valuable as our biggest customers because we could not afford a disruption in our supply chain. What we did is we offered submersible motors to our customers, and so people that weren't on city water, this was their water source, and also agriculture. So just think about it. Sometimes there's an emergency where water is cut off and they need water immediately, so we can't have a disruption in the supply chain. We have to be able to meet those needs, or people don't have water, or farmers can lose their whole crop. So just some color there. And the EP programs, it can help justify investments in automation, because some of the ROI of automation, which we'll talk about later, and we talk about a lot on our Treasury webinars, and what this does, it just helps fuel the business case for that automation, because we are seeing improvements in working capital management. So, and of course, near and dear to my heart, makes Treasury more strategic. Again, it improves our capital management, improves our supplier relationship as we invest in automation, and also streamlining this EP program. It impacts our employee productivity. If you've never done this before, if you look at all the people and processes involved in the accounts payable process end to end, it's almost mind-boggling. So AP is probably the most complex business operation that companies have, and that we're just over the last 3 or 4 years starting to see an investment in that, which is great. And there's low-hanging fruit in terms of productivity, mitigating the cost of having employees spend time on non-value-add activities. Again, Treasury improves cash forecasting, and then visibility into the levels of timing of currency exposures facilitate better risk exposure management. So those of us who have international operations. So that value proposition becomes even more compelling. Those of you who are doing business and or have suppliers across international borders. The benefits to suppliers. So this is where we fall short often, is we need to be able to communicate the value. Hey, I want you to engage in this program. Well, why would I want to do that, right? So it puts the suppliers in control of their cash. It facilitates predictable, reliable cash flow, improves working capital management on their end, helps them avoid risky and expensive funding methods. So again, if they're a net borrower, it avoids adversarial situation with the customers, which is you in this case. So it really helps that be a mutually beneficial relationship, any things that can come up. There's flexibility in when to accept discounts. And this point doesn't get enough play as well. It lowers their accounts receivable processing costs. So the better we are at having electronic communication, exchange of information with our suppliers on their side, what's going to be a great benefit to them is that it's going to lower their accounts receivable processing costs meaningfully, especially if we are making payments electronically and getting that remittance information over them. My treasury folks, just imagine how much money you have spent or are spending on lockbox costs. Wouldn't it be great to eliminate those lockboxes, which for me, one of the main reasons was to get that remittance information so we could work on cash application. So you're like, wow, this is so awesome. Why isn't everyone doing it? Shauna touched on this a little bit. Well, part of it is that we don't have our AP house in order. We got slow invoice processing, so there might not be a gap, right? We might not have the opportunity. Also, we might not have visibility, right? We might not even know that this opportunities already exist. So when you get that visibility, you can see the opportunity that's already out there. So we already have this opportunity to leverage maybe some 210 net 30 and then take it another level. Oh, so let's play on that. Let's see what other opportunities that we might have to offer more dynamic terms, or is there ways, opportunities to let you look at other ways to use that, leverage that gap and that difference in the capital cost between our company and our suppliers. We have understaffed AP departments. Again, that's not going to go away. The good news is automation. What automation does, it really allows us to not spend time on those non-value add activities and allows us to focus on value add activities, which are conclude early payments programs. Sometimes there's financing complexities depending on your company. Sometimes there's just questionable data hygiene. I think that's related to not having visibility. Sometimes there can be negotiation ping pong if there's no way to really communicate. If you really have your ducks in a row, you can really see that visibility. You can make it a win-win, but if there's no way to communicate this value to your suppliers, they're not going to see it as a win-win. You can have disconnected technologies, which means your systems aren't integrable. And then you can have complicated reconciliation related to transactions. So let's talk about some untapped existing opportunities. As I mentioned, many companies have limited visibility into existing discount opportunities. So just some look at some research from the IOFM. Look at your performance is top tier. And then if you look at the percentage of invoices eligible, might be small, but the dollar amount of opportunities can be big. And then the discounts percentage can be small, but the dollar amount of opportunities can be significant. So what you want to do when you're looking at opportunities, there's two pieces to it, right? We want to look at the percentage of invoices eligible, but if we can have a higher adoption rate, it can make a lot of sense. Or the discount percentage may be small, but the dollar amount of opportunities can be high. So we really want to focus on kind of some of the bigger accounts there. So just some interesting information. Again, this is pretty looks pretty much what we'd expect. We're looking at pretty much 210 net 30. But again, you want to look at what's the volume of that. What is the overall volume? And then we can start to look at some sort of differences. We have to look at the opportunities with our suppliers. So we might put our suppliers into categories in terms of working with them and look at that low-hanging fruit and get some early wins. But it's important that you look at, again, on both sides of it. You want to maximize the percentage in the program of your suppliers, but you also want to maximize the number of dollar amounts that you're impacting. So let's get to our early payments myths. We mentioned these earlier. One would be that your finance team is not ready. The programs are difficult to manage. The financing is difficult. Your suppliers won't participate, and then just the math doesn't add up. So let's dive in here. Early payment myth one: finance is not ready. Well, I think we've touched on this at a high level. So really, what really facilitates the readiness of your finance team is really the effectiveness of your accounts payable process and team. So AP automation does right, can really give you a touchless invoice workflow. So the supplier submits the invoice. So however that comes in, this is what it looks like done right. You have the OCR, optimal character recognition, looks at that, enters the data. No one's typing that in. It reviews it if needed. If not, boom, it goes to the approver. Can do a one-click sign-off. Sends that invoice to AP. Goes to AP. Everything goes up. If we have a manufacturing or whatever, or most people purchase order batches up. Sends an invoice payment. Boom. So what you might say is, man, my flow doesn't look like this. It doesn't mean that you have to be touchless invoice workflow, but the point is that if you are along the path of AP automation, or you're going, or you're already there, your finance team is already, or you're on the path to getting there. And part of looking at AP automation as a whole, you should be looking at early payments programs as part of that value proposition to get yourself the technology that you need to deliver value from accounts payable. So here's some more specifics. You're not ready. Again, you will be ready. Your automated invoice approval in place. If you have access to balance sheet cash or third-party capital. If your suppliers are ready, already use a supplier portal that facilitates, again, the great communication and the supplier relationship quality. You have the ability to reconcile EPs within your ERP system. Someone within the finance owns a transformation effort. You know how to drive adoption from suppliers. You know how to determine discount rates to encourage supplier adoption. And then the alignment of procurement, AP, and treasury. So procurement and AP can execute on POs and improve invoices. Treasury can manage liquidity and understand the strategy to align with working capital targets. So let's say your thought is, my finance team is not ready. Well, what does it mean for my finance team to be ready? And this slide right here does a great job of showing that your finance team is more than ready, right? But these are all pieces. You don't have to have all of these to make the program make sense. It's just this really focuses on what is it to optimize the value of early payments program. So myth two, early payment programs are difficult to manage. So the good news is early payments programs do not require extensive and complex systems integration, especially in terms of leveraging AP automation. The automation solutions are designed for integrability and are often cloud-based systems. It doesn't require additional banking relationships for you to manage and doesn't require additional lines of credit. So they're not difficult to manage. Some other parts which make them not difficult to manage. You can make supplier adoption part of your integrated automated accounts payable flow. You can work with procurement, actually put this into your contract in some manner. You can streamline your messaging and adoption. You can educate your supply chain, as I mentioned earlier, educate them on the value proposition. You can engage them digitally, so you can, as part of that onboarding process, see if there's an interest, communicate the value, and facilitate that process. So you're actually getting organically, you're almost getting leads to come in. Hey, we're interested in this, and you can hand that off, and boom, get them into that automated workflow. And then if you automate maintenance and program execution, leveraging the right technology. So really that myth goes away pretty quickly. The financing will be difficult. So let's take a look. We say that actually might be somewhat true if you have a traditional early payments program, but if you look at an automated EP program, so what is it? What's the difference? In a traditional, it's a loan. In the automated AP, it's a process. We have some negotiation issues in the traditional sense. In the automated side, it takes that game playing out of it. In the traditional EP program, you have paperwork, paperwork, paperwork. We really don't have that. So again, we're not engaging people in non-value add activities. And then in the traditional program, only a few suppliers get to participate because of the effort required. And so the point on the automated part, offering EP to more or even all suppliers, adoption rate can go up by six times to 8 times what it is right now. So if you look at that automated program, you'll start to see that financing does not have to be difficult. So suppliers will not participate. So before we delve in here, let's go ahead, before we start to talk about supplier relationships, let's benchmark the audience here and asking you to share with us how you would characterize the overall state of your company's relationships with your suppliers, which is important, and how much opportunity will exist in terms of leveraging early payments programs, but also in taking control of how and when you make payments. Again, I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions here today. Those of you interested in CTP credits, you will have to answer all of our polling questions here today. I want to remind you that we can take your questions at any time in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will do our best to get to your questions at the end of our webinar today, time permitting, for the Q&A. So let me go ahead, leave the polling question up for another few seconds, then we'll take a quick peek at the results, and then we'll start to dive into what really makes a successful supply chain financing program and some of the things that you can do, and just help you identify some of the pain points that you might have in terms of AP automation, what can be done about them, and then how we can move to leveraging early payment programs. So let's go ahead and close that. Let's go ahead, take a quick look at the results, and I'm glad to see that only 3% of you, not good, poor communication is constant, and so almost 60% of you say that it's only acceptable, right? So we can do better, right? I mean, actually 58% of you, only 42% of you would say you communicate and collaborate effectively, and having your AP automation house in order is something that can absolutely help that. And I think this should be a goal of every company of all sizes. So, and don't know, your homework is going to be to find out. So Shauna, let me bring you in again here. Do you have any thoughts here? Is this a part of what you have conversations with? Also trying to educate customers on making those supplier relationships more mutually beneficial with technology.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad to see that such a high percentage characterize their relationship as acceptable or great with a lot of collaboration. If you're using technology, you can make things even easier. Things like, online, always on access through a portal, supplier communications, and just things like that. So maybe you might be able to take away a few other tips after this webinar.
Thank you very much, Shauna, and thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to answer our polling question. So again, one of the things that really fuels success of early payments programs is going to be the quality of that supplier relationship. So one of the things that really doesn't get enough attention, again, the process, is the onboarding process. So we'll talk about the onboarding process, and then we'll talk about the supplier relationships in general, some of those pain points that you might see, and then you'll start to see, okay, this is how we can remove those pain points. So you have to know they exist before you can figure out how to remove them. The good news is technology is often a way to do that. So if you look at key factors of success in terms of a successful program, you have ease of onboarding suppliers. So these are all things that we talked about. Just so if you're looking at these types of program, you'll see that these are things that add to that success. So just wanted to really point out here that ease of onboarding suppliers is actually extremely important. And then support and education of procurement and suppliers. So you have to sell this internally, right? You have to get everyone on board, see the value, but you also have to do it with your suppliers as well. And then, of course, we have to have the ability to do that working capital analysis and spend. We have to have that visibility. So let's take a look at some of these pain points. Again, just to get you thinking a little bit, if this isn't a focus of your company and you don't use a supplier portal, some of the things that can happen or might be pain points, you can actually add illegal suppliers. Those would be companies that you're not supposed to even make payments to because of maybe sanctions, international sanctions, regulation. I would also call it illegal. Maybe sometimes I see errors in companies that have moved. Maybe if you don't have visibility, you're making payments to a company that you no longer do business with. You can set the wrong tone by delays in receiving tax forms. If you don't use a supplier portal, you can have incorrect bank instructions, so that can cause payments. Those of you in Treasury, just like me, I used to call myself payments detective. Where did the money go? And then a big pain point for me used to be supplier data quality, which is related to duplicate supplier records, our data quality. One of the things that I often struggled with was just the parent-child relationships and those duplicate records. We can do a whole webinar on the hygiene of your master supplier master, but it is, if part of your process and excellence in accounts payable is to get folks on these supplier portals. You let your suppliers take control of that information, own that information, especially in terms of banking information. That takes some of the risk off of your company. And the other thing that supplier portals do is it lets us have no asymmetries in the visibility, right? So we want to say, okay, this is what we owe, this is when we owe it. You can pull it up on the same screen, so you mitigate those disputes that you might have. So you're cutting that off at the pass. How much time is spent on the phone with your suppliers? That's something I would encourage you to find out. It amazes me when I look at research and talk to folks how much time is spent. Some folks in AP can spend 4 to 6 hours a day every single day on issues, and oftentimes these issues are very readily avoidable just from visibility into what's owed, but also around all the communications and the trends in the payments that you're making. And then just some supplier management pain points, which I've touched on. Again, that lack of visibility, and just sometimes there's collaboration barriers that you can have, which I think are often based on technology. You can have relationships constraints, which I would see if you're having multiple points of contact with your suppliers within your AP team, but you can't see what the other person is doing. That's a huge relationship constraint. And then a big relationship constraints in terms of supplier relationship management is just being reactive instead of proactive. If you have that visibility, right, into information, you can avoid the same issues happening month over month, and then you can be proactive in communicating ways to offer value. So oftentimes what you'll see is in these early payments programs, it can absolutely be a win-win. You can be proactive in offering those values. So just a little bit of insights for me in terms of Art of Supplier Engagement. Again, I've said this many times, but those of you know me, I like to repeat things over and over so it sticks with folks. The strength of the supplier relationship, the better it is, the easier it is to engage suppliers in EP programs. What does that look like? We just talked about effective supplier onboarding. Again, visibility into supplier communication. Visibility removes those asymmetries in information, what is owed and when it's due. Again, it creates opportunities to take and negotiate discounts. You can't manage what you can't see, right? And then you're proactive as opposed to reactive relationship management. And then what you're doing with the whole process is we have strong relationships. We are facilitating. We want to facilitate finance involvement in supplier relationships. And so sometimes it can be we might need someone from Treasury or Finance, on the phone with us, right? So we can communicate what's the value to your AR team, right? What's the value on your side? What are the processing costs? What's the opportunity cost of capital? So we can talk apples to apples. So what you're doing is you're creating a collaboration between your company and your supplier just beyond, okay, I owe you $10,000. When are we going to pay that? It can go much deeper than that. And that's tremendously valuable on many fronts. So early myth payment number 4, but they won't participate. And this is from recent research. 80% of suppliers will accept a discount for early payment. Let that sink in for a moment. Think about it, right? You have obviously everyone on the audience has a different profile. of their suppliers, but that's just a term which is hoping to get your attention, right? It's worth it for you to look and see. And so here is the, the opportunities. So let's just say that you're able to process that invoice in 15 days, approve it, and then get it out the door same day. So I would say maybe 16 would be the day, because you're going to have, at best case, you're going to do an ACH unless you're making a credit card payment. Or that would be a payment. So get that money. So 60 days due date. So here's the opportunity, the difference, right? So you can pay. So there's 45 days in there to play with, and the discount as well. So to me, there is a huge opportunity there for collaboration. And then the discounts are not worth it. Again, there's two pieces of this. In order to be mindful of our time, I don't want to get too much into the specific example. Something that we're happy to run through with you, or you can work through yourself if you want to copy the slides. But what we're trying to say is it can be valuable whether you have low adoption and high adoption. So we can have low adoption, higher discount, right? That can be a win. And high adoption, lower discount. Obviously, the cat's meow is high adoption, high discount percentage. So you don't want to get focused on one of the criteria in order to really look at the size of that opportunity. So in our case here, where we have a 2% discount and a lower adoption rate, the results are we could get the net benefit to us is $20,000. If we have a lower adoption rate, it's $8,000. And then even though we have a lower discount rate, if we have a 20% supplier adoption, we get $40,000 to us, or 15% would net us $30,000. So again, it's important to measure that opportunity correctly. And there's two things, right? The adoption rate and the discount. So those are things that you can work on. So if we had the quadrant, what we would want to do is maximize adoption and maximize the discount rate. And I know you all are more than tired of hearing my voice, so I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to Shauna for our next few slides to offer her insight. Shauna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ernie. So kind of just talking about this a little bit more, the idea of kind of how you calculate the ROI of an early payments program. As Treasury professionals, looking at the numbers, being able to evaluate them, and understand the organizational impact is very important. So what we do at Tipalti is we offer an online early payments cost benefit modeler. So that's going to help you understand how different things like the adoption rates, the discount rates, the FT salaries and spend affect the early payments program, and kind of help you understand the different levers that will drive the success of your program. So I encourage all of you to check it out to see how your organization may benefit. The link is listed in the resources section of the deck that will be sent out after the webinar. So if we switch to the next slide here, we'll see kind of a comparison of today, talk a little bit about today's early payment programs and how they're a little bit different from those that you may be familiar with. So today's early payment programs really offer the best of both dynamic discounting and supply chain finance. So you're still going to get that margin improvement and the flexibility with your working capital because you're not using your own balance sheet cash to fund the early payments, but you're also not having to deal with multiple banking relationships to manage. So really this new breed of technology is really what we're seeing is marked by broad supplier adoption because it's easy to use for both buyers to implement and also for your suppliers to accept. And that's what's making these technologies a lot more accessible to more companies and more sustainable long-term too. So if we go to the next slide here, kind of diving a little bit deeper into that ease of use message, that's what's really going to help drive adoption across your supplier base. So now I want to kind of walk you through how these modern early payment programs actually work. So first off, you as the buyer decide which suppliers are eligible for early payments and what percentage of the payment amount can be paid early. And then once the payment is approved, the supplier is going to get an email that has that early payments offer in it. So it's really easy because the tools that are offered today, they already have the supplier email communications built in and embedded. Ernie was talking about that earlier when he's talking about the supplier onboarding and management process. So it's not going to be a big change to your supplier's regular workflow and how they engage with you. So it will be standard for them to receive an email from you. And then the new part will just be that early payments offer. And of course, the discount amount is going to vary based on a few different things. So what payment method the supplier chooses, what their location is, and the number of days early that they choose to be paid. And that intelligence is all baked into the tool, so it's not anything you have to configure. And then what happens is once the supplier actually accepts the early payment offer, they just have to click the link in the email, then that's going to be immediately processed for payment. And what's also great for you is a finance partner is going to cover those early payment balances. So they're covering all of that, and then you just pay the bill like you normally would when it comes time for the original bill due date. So of course, though, you're going to earn a portion of each dollar or payment amount that's paid out early through a referral fee. So that's just going to allow you to reinvest back into your business, which is obviously a great thing. So really, it's not a big change for you on your part to set this up, and it's really easy for suppliers to actually accept these offers. So if we go to the next slide, that's what's really explaining the difference in the adoption rates between these traditional programs and the modern programs of today. So it's the fact that it's a very seamless process, it's very frictionless for both you as the buyer to offer it and suppliers to accept it. That's what's driving that high adoption. So our supplier adoption rate at Tipalti is conservatively at around 15%, but we've had several months where we have, across some of our customers using us for early payments, where 60% or more of their suppliers are accepting the early payment offers. And of course, the type of suppliers that you're offering these early payments to also makes a difference, whether it's more short tail, long tail, but just overall, that average rate of 15% is really just a testament to the ease of use and how we can make your early payments program profitable for you. So now I'm going to hand it back to Ernie to give you some actionable tips and just a few closing thoughts around early payment programs.
Thank you very much, Shauna, for your insights. So as far as an action plan, so oftentimes when I do webinars, I get follow-up questions like, okay, what do we do? How do we do this? How do we get started? You gave me a lot of great information, but I really don't know what to do next. Well, we've already talked about a little bit of the action plan when Shauna shared that great tool that we have to look at the ROI. So I think that would be something that I would definitely look at as well as part of one of my takeaways here. But as far as a really simple, simple step process, identify the type of early payments programs you want to, implement based on your company's needs, which will also incorporate looking at your supplier base. What's the risk profile? You want to establish the rates for all suppliers. So you may want to have a rate. You may want to segment your suppliers and do different risk categories. You want to enable your suppliers to easily join the early payment program with every transaction. I can tell you this is pretty seamless. And Tipalti is actually one of my customers, and I'm their supplier, so I have actually participated in this, and it's really seamless. You just get that invoice, you get the email that asks you if you want to take advantage of it. It's really seamless. It's pretty cool in all honesty. And then you want to automatically draw those discounts from the payment. So this would be a great slide for you to print off. Again, I want to give a little bit more color on some actionable items for you in terms of improving your supplier relationships. That really drives the success of the programs, maximizes the opportunity. You want to make the onboarding process a seamless experience. You want to educate your suppliers. You want to make sure that you are engaged with your procurement team, pay attention to the terms. You want to maintain open lines of communication with your suppliers, remove those asymmetries of information. You want to make sure you're providing proactive and consistent support, and we want to have that visibility into all communications with our suppliers. And then what I say is how you need to know how to dance with your suppliers. So how do we get them on board? You need to communicate the benefits of the right EP program for each supplier you want to engage. So it might be you want to segment them between dynamic discount and that supply chain financing. You want to understand the inherent barriers that may exist to adoption for a supplier. So the folks that are in charge of those relationships get a sense of maybe the company culture there, what is their adoption of technology. So remove those. Explore opportunities to make adoption more efficient for suppliers. Again, it's always good to have an electronic payment type. And then you can partner with e-payable solution providers to improve your dance moves, I would say, in place when it makes sense. So as Shauna mentioned, with Tipalti, you can automate that process. You want to be involved in that messaging, but you can really take yourself out of that process. So they are tremendously skilled. Obviously, you look at the adoption rates that Shauna mentioned, can just look at compared to what you have now. I hope you have higher than 15%, but from what I've seen, that's really, really above, it's really fantastic. And like she said, that estimate's probably conservative. So some more closing thoughts. Automate invoice to pay to reconciliation. You want to automate your discount programming elements. What do we do to achieve adoption? Cast a wide net, make it easy to join. Integrated communication, you want to have that rebate system, and then you want to automate that reconciliation accounting for your splits. And then some additional resources that I have listed here, some of the research that I've put here for your purview. And again, if you'd like to get a copy of the slides, I'm happy to share those with you. Email, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And there you'll see that a lot of these resources are on the Tipalti website. They have a treasure trove of resources. And again, they absolutely share my commitment to thought leadership. And so that's why I love partnering with them. So there are some great resources there on the Tipalti website. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open our Q&A session. We don't have a lot of time for our Q&A session. Again, I'll get to your questions we do not get to after the webinar. And thank you so much for asking all of your questions. So as I ask, I'm going to give Shauna one question here before we wrap up. I'd like to launch our final polling question as we do that. So Shauna, kind of a two-part question here. What do you think is helping drive the adoption rate in a positive manner? And are you seeing any, I guess three parts. That's one. Two, are you seeing any trends in industries that you have? And three, is there anything coming on the horizon in terms of maybe new technology in this area, or things that might be coming in the future, or there might have happened in 2019?
Sure. So first question in terms of adoption rate, I think what's really driving that is that twofold. One, our customers, suppliers are already used to receiving email communications. So it's very easy for them to look at an email and then accept the offer. It's very clear language. It's very clear what they're getting and the discount they'll take for getting paid early. So I think those two things is what makes the adoption so much higher at Tipalti. And then in terms of the industries where we're seeing these much higher adoption rates, I'd say it's kind of, we're seeing this around companies like ad networks or certain gig economy companies. So for example, the publishers are choosing to get paid early for their payouts for advertisements on a gaming platform. One of our most successful clients who has that 60 to 65% adoption rate consistently, that's what their business model is. But of course, we have customers across other more traditional industries as well, software, manufacturing, that are also able to take advantage of the early payments program. And then in terms of what's coming on the horizon or new innovations around this type of technology, I would say it's just opening up the payment methods that are available. So making more payment methods available to suppliers and then making those payment methods eligible for early payments as well.
Thank you very much, Shauna, for answering that question. And also I want to thank you very much for your great insights contributed on the webinar. Appreciate that. I'd also like to once again thank our sponsor, Tipalti. We appreciate and share their commitment to thought leadership, again, which you can see from the great content and resources they offer on their website. So I encourage you to visit the Tipalti website. And finally, to you, our audience, thank you so much for your valuable time. We sincerely appreciate the support of each and every one of you. Make the rest of your day great, everyone.